Hey everybody, it's me again. I decided to pop on here to discuss some things that I've been thinking about the last couple of days. As you probably are well aware, a lot of school systems around the country are preparing to um, get back to school in some way, whether it be in class or online or in a variety of ways. And I wanted to come on here to talk about that, but even greater extent, how we can make education better in America. And I'm going to do that by talking about some of my experiences back in the day. And I want to preface this by saying I don't have any kids myself. My niece is graduated from high school. She graduated over a year ago. My step-nephew graduated 2 years ago, and my step-niece graduated about, 5 years ago, I think, maybe longer than that. Something like that. Actually, longer than that. I'd say maybe about 6 years ago. But anyhow, I wanted to come on here to talk about in my honest opinion, we have to be safe with our kids, and kids are resilient. And right now, yeah, it sucks that a lot of them will not be back in school in classrooms right now, but they can catch up, especially if they're young enough. In my opinion, I think that the most important thing is that they're safe and they're engaged in some way, shape, or form. And this is a challenge for parents as well as teachers and all of that. And I know how hard it is because I grew up in a single parent household, and I sometimes wonder what my mom would have done in a situation like this. And it would have been very stressful for her, to say the least. But in times like this, we find ways to persevere. And I think that's part of the problem is people aren't willing to or wanting to find ways to persevere. They don't want to change the way they've always done things because it's comfortable. And to me, the biggest problem is that we fail to understand that that it is necessary that we go through this, not just for the safety of our children, but also for them to build up some resilience, to build up some skills to cope with this. And we need to be honest with our children. We need to be honest with the fact that this is a very extraordinary time. It's a very different time. And that means you've got to be inventive. That means, if you happen to live out in the boondocks and you don't have a really good internet connection and all that, you find ways to make do. You find ways to keep up, allow your child to keep up. It's a challenge for parents, and parents sometimes have to learn to persevere in most difficult circumstances and such. And the world is not the way you want it to be. It is the way it is, and you've got to accept that sometimes. And it's like the Stones used to sing. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. And I think that is what we need to think about right now because, to be perfectly honest, we're in a situation where we don't know what's going to happen 2 weeks from now, much less 2 months from now, or the end of the year, because a lot of things could change. But let's talk about after this is all over with. Our schools aren't what they should be. And a lot of it is the fact, I think, that sometimes we forget that children aren't just being taught academic skills to get them ready for the workforce. They need to be taught about how to deal with life, how to deal with everything that involves a life, and not just workplace skills and all of that. And I think in some cases maybe we're going too fast with some kids. I know that a lot of the stuff my niece was doing in earlier grades we didn't do until later grades. And it surprised me how much they were doing at such an earlier age, and the opportunities she had to actually do community college level schoolwork in high school without actually having to go to the community college necessarily. So that was something that was very fascinating to me, and it wasn't available back then. We could have taken community college classes in the evening. I think if I remember correctly, it's for free, but that would have been on top of our academic load. And at that time, to be honest with you, I didn't have the capability of doing that. And for reasons I didn't have a way to get over to the college in the afternoons at the time. And also, to be perfectly frank, I was burning out. I was one of those kids that really was a gifted and talented kid that didn't have the adequate gifted and talented program to really keep my interest, and I got bored. And when you get bored, you get lazy, and you get lazy, you don't do the kind of job. And I look back at things and I'm like, if I had internet 45 years ago, if we had what we have today 45 years ago when I was starting school or about to start school, I would have been one of those kids that graduated from high school at 15 or 16 years old, maybe even earlier, gone to college and graduated with a bachelor's degree at 20 years old. Maybe earlier, who knows? Because what I see today is the kind of thing I would have loved to have had back when I was in school. And unfortunately, in the mid to late 70s and throughout the 80s, we didn't have that. And we had these things called library books and Dewey Decimal System and all of that. You can't just pop on your phone to get a wiki article about a particular history. You actually have to read a book and go through it and all that. And it's not like it is today. We fail to take advantage adequately of these technological advances, I think. And we need, and a lot of the reason is we're not giving the schools the funding they need to really, and especially when it comes to teachers, we're not paying them enough. And in many ways, not only we're not paying them enough, we're expecting them to help pay for supplies as well. So it is kind of dumb the way we handle it with teachers and such compared to other countries and such. And we really need to take a page out of that. Now, some of the ideas I've had is, first of all, we really need, there's this thing called adulting out there that I'm not sure if you've heard of, where young adults, say in their 20s and sometimes in their 30s, don't even know how to boil water or do basic cooking and basic stuff around the house and such. And I think what would help with that is if we were to institute a program where we had a life skills class where half of the year you spent in home economics and half of the year you did introduction to shop, where you learned basic stuff around the house, how to sew a button, how to cook biscuits, how to do some basic cooking and household stuff, as well as fix-it stuff. It would be something that's different from, and it would challenge the students that are just all about books. Because I think the problem in this country is sometimes we focus too much on everybody making all these great grades and not challenging ourselves academically. And I think that is a big deal. Another program that we should have is teaching our kids personal finance skills. My senior year, I took a class called Intro to Business, which was basically a real easy class. It was a filler class. Didn't really need it, but it was a situation where I learned enough things to where I stayed out of financial trouble and didn't really damage my credit all too bad. But it was a situation where had I not had that, I might have made some mistakes that haunted other people that didn't take a class like that. And you could take a class. You should have a class where kids learn about the responsibilities of personal finance, about credit and checks and all this, and making sure that they've got all that kind of skill involved with it. And to me, that would be essential. We really need to help our children learn more about how to deal with the world, not just from an academic viewpoint, not just from a career viewpoint, but from a life viewpoint. And some parents will argue, well, that should be just for preachers and teachers and whatnot, but in some cases they're not getting that. And I think sometimes you need that kind of a clash of ideas for that, because let me be perfectly honest. Parents sometimes forget they're not trying to make a clone of themselves. They're trying to develop a person that has the necessary skills to be a productive and responsible citizen. That's what they got to do, and doesn't necessarily mean they have to do everything exactly like their parents are wanting them to do and all that. And I think that's important to remember, because we forget sometimes that kids are not just clones of people, and they should never be that way. You know, it's important that we remember that, because I think sometimes we tend to forget, and pardon me, I'm moving some things around. I need to move around in my little humble home office area. But it is important to remember that, because we have a very challenging world out there, and we don't. There are some people who go out there not knowing about how to deal with it in a moral and ethical way, and some people will dismiss that. Well, if you want morals and ethics, just send your kid to church. Well, that's the thing. You don't necessarily need, in order to learn morals and ethics, you don't necessarily have to teach them about religion. Ethics isn't just about religion. Ethics is about, and I took an ethics class in college, and we did talk some about religion, but it was basically, in my opinion, it stayed within the lines that the Constitution allows for. It was part of academic freedom. And I think that's important that we have those discussions, because especially, and I think this would be a really good thing, because it would get rid of a lot of misinformation about other religions. Have a world religions class. Don't just teach the Bible. Teach all religions, so that people can compare and contrast and make up their own minds. And that's the problem, is that a lot of people have this fear that if you teach your kid about a different religion, they're going to jump on that religion. The odds are not that great for that. I took that world religions class in 1993. Learned a lot about Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Shintoism, and other religions, and I'm pretty much the same Christian-leaning person as I was before that class. I didn't jump to become a hard right-wing Islamic fundamentalist terrorist or anything like that, But it was important, because you realize in a class like that not all Muslims are the same, not all Jews are the same, not all Christians are the same, not all everybody is the same. And that is something that we tend to forget in society these days, is that people aren't always the same. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We need to remember that, because sometimes in our society we get so caught up in all of this chaos of making ends meet and all that, we forget that we got to live sometimes, and we got to live with other people. And some of those people don't always live life the same way you do. And that's important to remember, because in a diverse culture that we have these days, and it is a diverse culture, ladies and gentlemen, whether you like to admit it or not, sometimes those differences can become bigger than they actually are. Now, let's get to my experience with education. I mentioned earlier I was a gifted and talented kid in an area that didn't have such a gifted and talented program. We did have one in I went to 4 different schools. K through 3 I went to Forest City Elementary. 4 through 6 I went to Dunbar Elementary. 7th and 8th grade I went to Cool Springs Middle School, although we called it Cool Springs Junior High because at one time it used to be high school. So it was technically Cool Springs Middle School. We called it Cool Springs Junior High because we thought it was cooler. And then my high school years was East Rutherford 9 through 12. I didn't have any extracurricular activities until middle school, and that was basically annual staff and something called the Science Power Club, which was a one-year thing that it ended when the 7th grade science teacher mysteriously left under circumstances that to this day I'm not entirely sure of. I don't want to say that because there's a possibility he's still alive and he might find out and he might not have been guilty of what he's been accused of. And I don't know for certain if he was. You hear rumors all the time, and I'll leave it at that. But he left mysteriously. I didn't know until somewhat into the 8th grade year that he left not of his own accord, according to rumor. You know, I thought he'd just gotten another job and didn't think anything of it, you know. But nowadays, middle schools have a lot of the things that high schools have. They have newspapers, other clubs and all that. And things have changed a lot and for the better, and I wish we'd had that back then. And even now, you've got extracurricular activities for children. Now, there is an argument to be said that you don't want to put your kids through all that much extra stuff. And some kids probably would benefit from not doing that. But there are those of us who would have, especially those of us who didn't have the opportunities others had for one reason or another. And I can tell you, I love my mom to death. She's no longer with us. She's been gone for 13 years now. But if she were here, she'd be the first to tell you she wished she could have done more for us. And I think that's the mark of a good parent when they admit that they did as good as they could have under the circumstances, but they wish they could have done more. And that, I think, any good parent is going to be willing to say that. Because it's one of those things that as a mark of a good leader, is that a leader will go, yeah, we did great things, but I wish we could have done more. Wish we could have done better things. And I could go through the whole list, but looking back at my academic upbringing, I think the biggest problem was I was one of those kids that was too smart for his own good. I may have had HDAD back then, or attention deficit disorder, whatever they call it. I was process things very quickly, and sometimes when you do that, you tend to get bored very, very easily. And back then, it was, in many cases, it was one-size-fits-all education, where you didn't have the kind of education that you can have these days, where you can have kids going at a faster rate than other kids, and they can learn faster and maybe even progress faster, maybe even jump a grade or two. Because I think the best thing that could happen to me back when I was in kindergarten is if they said, you know, I was in a kindergarten first and second grade classroom, and I was buzzing through kindergarten work and being able to do first and second grade work. They should just let me jump to second grade. But they were worried about my social development. Well, I think part of the reason I had issues with social development was I was being held back, and it felt like that. And when you feel like that, and you feel like you're smart, but you're not smart enough to jump and it gets kind of tiresome. And in many cases, I think it just really, it's crazy. It really is. When I think back to those years, a lot of what I learned, I didn't learn in the classroom. I learned from going to the library, reading the books in the quote-unquote adult section, like geography books and history books and stuff like that. And I would recommend it to any parent whose kid is like, I don't want to read the kiddie books, I want to read the adult books. The books in the quote-unquote adult section. Let your kid do that. By all means. They may be reading something that they don't understand, but they may understand more than you think, because I remember I did a book report on Carl Sagan's Cosmos book. I think it was 5th grade, and the teacher was like, what? And I didn't understand a lot of what was in that book, but I understood enough that she was like, what? Kind of blown away by it. So, it was Miss Costner, I think it was. No, it wasn't her. It was somebody else. Can't remember her name. I know my homeroom teachers. I know some of my teachers from middle school, but most of them I don't remember, unfortunately. That's the problem. That's the price of getting old and not writing stuff down. All right. There's a lot of stuff. Like I said, I don't have a lot of really any notes or anything like this. I will say this: I really wish in my high school we had a Latin class, because they had one at Chase High School down the road, and I couldn't transfer there because it was too far away. The bus wouldn't take me. So, but they had a Latin class, and I really look back at it and go, that would have been great to learn languages, because if I'd learned Latin, you could have learned a lot of different languages from that. I took French one year thinking it was going to, because for some stupid reason, yeah, I do have some brains, but I also don't have as much common sense as I'd like, and sometimes I do some stupid stuff. So my idea of taking French was, hey, it might make me better with the ladies. That worked out real well, didn't it? No. Should have took Spanish. And I would highly recommend, if you've got a kid, to take Spanish. For the simple reason of dealing with business today, not just for the fact we have a lot of Hispanics in America, but in this hemisphere, it's mainly outside of this country, Spanish-speaking people. And you are dealing with people, and I think in the future, in the next 10, 20 years, it'll be even more so. We'll be dealing with people in South America and Central America and Mexico, where you'll need to learn about that, because you're going to possibly be dealing with people as the economy changes and evolves, and some of the manufacturing comes back here, and some of the manufacturing it's one of those things. I think learning any language is good. I think learning Latin would be really, really good for any kid. I wish now I could have done that. I really wish we had the summer programs they have now, where instead of like remedial programs, you have programs that help a kid maybe learn more and take some chances and learn a class that they know they're not going to initially do quite well right off the bat. And I think that's important to remember, is that, you don't necessarily have to have a class that, like I remember the most challenging class I ever had was English Lit 1 and 2 in college. And that was a challenge to make 2 B's. The hardest B's I ever made was in that class. But yeah, I think in many ways, looking back at my education, I learned a lot more in community college and high school, because in high school we were very regimented. 6 classes all the year long, 1 hour long. They changed that now in the 90s. It's now semesters where you have 4 classes in the fall, 4 classes in the spring. I think it's much better for the students. They're not stuck in the same class with a teacher that they may or may not like the whole year. And I think things are better now than they were back in the day, because you did have some teachers. I do know some teachers that were basically there to make a paycheck, and they weren't necessarily really motivated as much to help students as they should have been. Some were basically trying to act like they had all the power in the world, but that's beside the point. But yeah, I just wanted to get on here and talk about this because I didn't have a ton of notes and all of that to talk about, but in my mind, I really think that if you get your kids to be curious and you get your kids to be involved in more than just what they're doing in school, because in many ways I think school school is like a job for kids. You go to school, you go like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, something like that. You get off at 3. I remember when I was in second grade, I felt like I was an office worker for some reason, and I was, honest with you, I felt like I was doing a drudgery work and all of that, and I think that's part of the reason I kind of got bored with it. And just kind of started lagging behind, was that I got bored with it. We were doing the same thing over and over and over again, it seemed like, and I think in many ways it's because the teachers back then felt like repetition was the best thing. That's not necessarily the best thing for everybody. And sometimes you need to change things up, and teachers, I think, these days are learning that. But at the same time, they're so regimented because they're teaching to a test nowadays. But whereas back then, they had more flexibility, and some teachers were really good, and some teachers just weren't, So there's definitely that. But yeah, I think in many ways our educational system could be a lot better. If I could suggest classes, I would say public speaking, more creative writing classes, or creative writing class. If you could teach your kids how to speak and write in a public setting, I think goes a long way to helping them be better students. Being willing to take chances. I think a summer program for kids, it would help with daycare needs. So it would keep kids out of trouble. But also give kids the opportunity to try classes that they don't necessarily have to worry about having a grade in. Like, let's say you wanted to try computer programming and you'd never tried it before, So yeah, that I think there's a lot there that I could talk about that I really wish now. I've learned some stuff in other areas of the country that they had that we didn't have, and I was it was a crazy time back then. We had a lot of fun back in my youth. We had a lot of the freedoms that a lot of kids wish they had these days. Like, I used to be able to ride my bike all around town. As long as I let my mom know where I was going. Could you imagine kids doing it these days? Oh my God. You'd have the law on my mom big time, but basically back then, as long as my mom knew where I was going, and usually it was either to playing basketball or playing putt-putt, which was on the other side of town, which was an adventure sometimes on a bike. Oh, God, those are crazy days. I will say this. If I had a dime for every time I almost got hit by a car, I could probably buy a Fiat or a Ferrari or something like that. Yeah, I was young and crazy back then. But yeah, we came upon a bike. So yeah, I don't know how in the world I didn't get hit. Especially some of the things I used to do around the roads that were near my house. Yeah. Anyhow, to sum it all up, we need to adapt our educational system for kids. We need to be more than just teaching them stuff for their career. We need to teach them stuff for life. How to deal with their personal finances, how to actually do stuff around the house would be a good thing. I think giving them more of an opportunity to try things without having to worry so much about grades would be a good thing, like in the summertime. I think putting more recess, getting them more actively involved in academics, including, I would dare say, get your kids more involved in extracurricular activities, both in school and outside of school. Because I really wish I had some of the opportunities other people do. But that's life. It ain't always fair. You don't. Like I said earlier, like the Stones used to sing, you can't always get what you want, but you try sometimes. You just might find you get what you need. Anyhow, that is it for now. I just came on here to chat a little bit. Hope you enjoyed it. And as we like to say, good day, good night, good luck, and may the good news be yours.